Dan Campbell trying to pull off one of the most incredible transformations. The Lions have never played in a Super Bowl. They're 60 minutes away from that. Welcome into the NFL on Fox podcast presented by Verizon. I'm Dave Helman, and welcome to Conference Championship Weekend. One game left on each side of the playoff bracket to determine who meets in Super Bowl 58 in Las Vegas in just a couple weeks. If you're a football fan, you're on the edge of your seat with anticipation for a full Sunday. If you are a fan of the Niners, Lions, Ravens, Chiefs, you are probably an anxious wreck. Either way, we will help you through it. We got the goods on both games. If that wasn't enough, the hiring cycle continues. A new head coach named on Thursday. We'll get to that. It's that time of year. You want to be up to date with the NFL news. Please give us a follow on Spotify. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're more of a YouTube kind of person, put the clip on, maybe let it run while you're doing some work. Please go find us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts and your news. There's a hiring, there's a coaching change every other day, and obviously the stakes get higher and higher all the way up to the Super Bowl. Please stick with us throughout the rest of the season. We would appreciate it. We'll jump into the games in a sec, but yes, it's Dave Canales, Tampa Bay offensive coordinator, getting hired by the Carolina Panthers on Thursday morning. 5 of the 8 NFL head coaching vacancies are filled. Jim Harbaugh goes to the Chargers earlier this week. The Raiders hire Antonio Pierce. For the Patriots, it's Gerard Mayo. Tennessee Titans with Brian Callahan. And now the Panthers with Dave Canales. Seattle, Washington, Atlanta, all still looking for head coaches. If I had to guess, one of those jobs will be filled by the time we know the Super Bowl matchup. I actually had a chance. It's fitting. We were going to talk to our buddy Greg Auman about the AFC Championship game later in the show anyway. He also covers the NFC South, so we're going to do a deep dive on what the Canales hire means for Carolina later on. But right now, let's get to our Fox game, the NFC Championship, Sunday night in Santa Clara, California. The San Francisco 49ers playing host to the Detroit Lions in a game with storylines that I can't quite wrap my head around. It's absolutely rife with them. One of the most talent-loaded rosters we've seen in recent memory. San Francisco 49ers seems like an all-pro at every position on the field, except the quarterback, ironically, who was the last pick in the NFL draft. Can't make it up. 5 Lombardi trophies. Championship pedigree galore, except it's been 29 years since the 49ers have won a championship. It's a drought that flies under the radar a little bit. Obviously, the 49ers have enjoyed plenty of success here over the last 10, 15 years. It has not resulted in a championship. 0-2 in their last 2 trips to the Super Bowl. They would love to rectify that. Who would love to rectify it more than the tactician himself, Kyle Shanahan, the architect of this whole thing? Had a lead in the Super Bowl just 4 years ago. Had a huge lead as an offensive coordinator with Atlanta in the Super Bowl back in 2016. Trying desperately to get over the hump with easily his most talented roster. On the other side, not NFL royalty. The Detroit Lions say, 1994, 29 years since your last championship? Kiss our ass. Try 66. Try 1957. Since the last time the Detroit Lions won a championship, the Super Bowl wasn't even a thought. They've been a laughingstock for the vast majority of that time. Only the second time they've played in the conference title game in the Super Bowl era. It's the rarest of rare air. A talented team in their own right. There's 7 combined all-pros in this game. Their quarterback, a former number 1 overall pick, Jared Goff, an all-pro receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown. How about the hometown dude, Aiden Hutchinson? As if it wasn't good enough that he's one of the best pass rushers in the league for the Lions. He's from the Detroit area, went to school at Michigan. You think he wants to deliver a win for the fans that haven't seen this type of success in 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Yeah, sounds pretty fun. And then on the other side of it, a guy that looks like the polar opposite of Kyle Shanahan in Dan Campbell, the kneecap biter himself, but who's actually on the cutting edge of all of the analytical decision-making that gets talked about so much in the NFL today. We'll get into that in a minute. Like I said, you could go on and on and on. A have versus a have not. A team trying to recapture its former glory, the Niners finally getting back on top of the league, versus a team that's trying to establish itself, a fan base that's been waiting longer than just about anybody. Cleveland fans might take issue with that, but you get my point. So many star players. It's going to be phenomenal. And who better to talk me through it than the guy we've been talking to all year? We've talked to Greg Olsen every Friday of the season, but this one bears special meaning. The NFC Championship, talking all things 49ers, Lions, the matchups to know, the storylines to watch, the decisions to watch as the Niners host the Lions. Check it out. All right, Greg, NFC Championship, Detroit Lions at San Francisco 49ers. Been waiting a long time for this one. I'll start here. As we're recording, I'm going to guess Deebo Samuel plays in this game, but we don't officially know. But I'm just curious, from your experience playing this game, how does it change, losing a player of Deebo's caliber mid-game and how that affects your game plan? How does that change now when you move forward and you're trying to game plan for the Lions where you're not 100% sure of his availability?
Yeah, so I think it's twofold. I think just generally speaking, anytime you lose one of your best players, you're going to feel it in some capacity, right? I know in the NFL, everyone's gotten so accustomed to just hearing, next man up, and you just put the next guy in. And while that's true, and you have no choice, you have to move forward, very rarely is the next guy up as good as the guy he's replacing, especially somebody like Deebo Samuel, right? You're not going to get a player that has the versatility and the comfort of being moved around and kind of fitting into this Shanahan offense the way he's built it. So that's the first part of it. Secondly, I think it's even more highlighted when it happens midstream. It's in the middle of the game, and everything we've worked on for 2 weeks, every good concept, every good play, Deebo Samuel's either a primary or a secondary component to what makes that play favorable and why Kyle Shanahan has it in the game plan and something that it wants to set up for later. And it's all kind of interconnected. So all of a sudden you take out one of those pieces. It's like taking out a piece of a puzzle. Like you could still get the idea of what the puzzle is going to look like and all that, but it's not the same. It's not completed. And I think that's what happened a little bit last week against Green Bay. I just think, a lot of what they probably felt good about and a lot of what, that both the primary role of like getting him the ball, but then also what he does to create space on the field with some of their formations and movements and formation variability, what that does to open up McCaffrey and Kittle and Ayuk. And it's all, he impacts the game when he doesn't just have the ball. So now all of a sudden you got other people in there. And I'll be honest, I thought Juwan Jennings did a really nice job. He made some big catches and probably had his most impact on a consistent basis. So you are going to get guys to step up. It's in a different fashion. They're different style players. This week, they'll probably have two plans. Like, okay, if he goes, and maybe it's in a limited capacity or whatever it is. If he's in the game, we know we can draw from this menu. But we also have all week to plan that if he doesn't play, everybody else knows exactly where they're going to be and what roles they have. So it's a little bit easier preparing for a game in advance of a player being out than it happening in the moment.
And there's more that goes into it than just this, but I think it's a talking point for a reason, because when Deebo was hurt earlier in the year, it contributed to a 3-game losing streak. With that knowledge in the back of their mind, how do you think the 49ers game plan for this if he can't go? And like I said, I think he will, but I do think that's a huge variable.
Yeah, so I think in general, Deebo playing or not playing, I think their style of play would be very interesting. And we haven't, as of recording this, we haven't spoken to San Francisco. And, this is all just off of our own prep and kind of digging in. It's pretty clear what Detroit's defense does really well. They are very good stopping the run. They overcommit to it. They're good at, they're even better at it versus like nickel personnel, where you'd imagine when they are in base personnel and they got more big bodies, more linebackers and defensive linemen on the field. But Brian Branch is one of the best rookies in the league. I mean, he's been a really good player, plays in that nickel spot. and he's a good run defender. So between him and Anzalone and Campbell and Derek Barnes, and then obviously the guys up front. So they make it a point to stop the run. So if I'm Kyle Shanahan, and obviously I'm not, but if I was, I'm really comfortable throwing the ball. The weather is going to be better. It's going to be warm. It's going to be dry. Brock Purdy has earned my trust over the years that in those conditions, he's as efficient and good with the ball as anybody. And I think I'm really going to test this Detroit secondary. That the pass defense of Detroit is the scary part. I think that's where they've had some limitations all year. And they seem to make opportunistic plays like the 2 picks last week. But in general, their efficiency numbers and whatnot just aren't as strong against the pass as they are against the run. So I know Shanahan doesn't want to be taken out of his run game. I know he takes pride in running it against heavy boxes and good rush defenses. But I think there is an element to, hey, if there is a weakness and there is something that you do well that can go against the defense, the more you sprinkle of that in, the more things tip into your favor, and then see how the game unfolds.
I enjoyed the way Detroit the wrinkle, I guess, they threw in the way they approached that Buccaneers game. It seemed like Aaron Glenn sent a lot of DBs at Baker Mayfield, and I kind of steering into the skid, right? Like, well, if we don't cover that well, we might as well send some of these guys at the quarterback. But I don't know if I buy that they can get away with that in this game. I mean, do they just keep that rolling, or do you have to come up with an entirely different approach?
I think it depends what style Kyle Shanahan plays from. I think it's a little bit easier to blitz when a quarterback's in the gun. You know, they brought a lot of nickel pressure. So like the guy who's guarding the number 2 receiver in the slot, he came off the edge probably 4 or 5 times alone, plus some of the other combination pressures that Aaron Glenn dialed up last week against Tampa. So I think the biggest thing is if they're going to sit Purdy back there in the shotgun, especially in some passing situations, they probably feel a little bit more comfortable now with what they can build shell-wise, that they can get after him and try to pressure him. The thing about Purdy, though, is he's excellent under pressure. He's excellent versus the blitz. He's excellent under center. He's excellent in the gun. Like all of his efficiency numbers, he's not one of those quarterbacks where it's like, hey, if we can muddy the pocket, he plummets. Hey, he's better under center, but if we can get him to play out of the gun, his numbers plummet. They don't. So I think Aaron Glenn's got an interesting decision to make in how he wants to play Shanahan. Everything with Shanahan and the 49ers is you got to stop. Everything they do is explosive plays, right? You even think of the run game last week of San Francisco, and we kept making it a point a million times to get the point across. Their run game's not scary because they get 5 yards every time. Their run game's scary because, as we saw, McCaffrey makes one guy miss and he has a 45-yard touchdown. Like, that's the element that their run game's just different than everybody else's, but you have to keep a lid on the explosive plays, run or pass. If you don't do that against San Francisco, the teams that don't are the teams that they just boat race.
You were there in those conditions. Do you, I mean, and I mean, obviously everything you said about the way Purdy has handled pressure and things like that, the numbers back it up and what you watch back it up, but it didn't always bear out in that game against Green Bay. Do you chalk that up purely to the conditions? Because I mean, it was pretty nasty up there last weekend.
I think there's a lot of reasons. I think very rarely is it just like one specific thing that you put your finger on. Listen, it was not Purdy's cleanest game, right? There was some missed reads. There were some balls that we showed just came out of his hand. You can tell he didn't have a great feel of the ball at times. And the reality was it was pouring. I mean, it might not have looked like it on television. I would look on the monitors, but then when you looked up in the lights and you looked on the field in real time, I mean, it was pouring for 75% of the game. There were certain pockets where it stopped. But I would say that is definitely a factor. I think Green Bay's defense played really well. I think Green Bay's zone coverages did a nice job matching. I think when Green Bay got in trouble was when they decided to go man coverage. I think those couple man decisions on third down, the Kittle touchdown and the Kittle third down conversion before they scored the McCaffrey touchdown, those 2 plays stick out in my head as being huge difference makers. But I think overall their front really got after the passer. They did a nice job controlling the game up front. And I think they gave San Francisco a little fit. So I don't think it was necessarily that Purdy just played bad. I don't think he played his best. I think you got to give credit to Green Bay. But all that being said, in the drive that mattered, when the game was on the line in the fourth quarter, I don't know, there was like, when they got the ball, I think there was like 4 or 5 minutes to go, whatever the time was in the fourth quarter. And they were down 4. And there was no field goal. There was no settle for three. It was, you need to take your team down right now and score a touchdown, or you're going to be knocked out of the playoffs in your first game. And Purdy had his best drive of the game. So I think sometimes all that other stuff goes out the window. How do you perform when it matters? And he did it.
He absolutely did. And I think, to your point, something that gets lost there is the Niners essentially decided, like, we're going to win it or lose it here. I mean, they got the ball with 4 or 5 minutes to play and took the clock all the way down to 1 minute. It's incredibly impressive that in that pressure situation where things are going to go sideways if you don't get it done on this drive, he did deliver. On the other side of this, I really like the way the Lions offense matches up in this game, except for the fact that Jonah Jackson is out and Frank Ragnow is going to be playing through multiple sprains, which is insane. I don't know how you do that, but it's incredible. How might that affect what the Lions want to do offensively when you don't have, I mean, specifically Ragnow being limited, but also Jackson not even playing in this game?
Yeah, I think it's a huge factor. And I think what's unique about the San Francisco defensive front is most games you go in saying, okay, how do we protect the tackles? Because on most teams, the edge guys are who kill you. And obviously San Francisco has that with Bosa and Young and whatnot. So they have that. But then what's also unique is their depth and their strength of their interior rush, which is going to go against the guys that you're mentioning in Detroit that are going to be either missing or playing presumably injured. So I think that's a huge factor. I do think as long as the game stays close, their ability to protect their offensive line, their ability to protect the passer with their scheme and their play action game, and the versatility of what they want to do with Ben Johnson's offense does take a lot of burden off of the offensive line. They can be, and especially when you have two tackles like they do with Decker and Penei Sewell, you can give a little bit more inside. You can have a little bit more compact protection. You don't have to feel like your guards need to really widen out to go help your tackles and give presence. So it all works together. But I will say in a close game that's not a runaway where Detroit has to play from behind, their versatility and their balance on offense makes a lot of that protection issues a little bit easier. It's very similar to what we said last week with Green Bay. It's very similar to how San Francisco, they all are kind of operating under the same presumption that if we can play in close games, our balance, our mix of run and pass, your inability to just rush a quarterback in the shotgun 35, 40 times a game slows the pass rush down. It alleviates a lot of the pressure on the offensive line. And I think more and more teams have to understand that. And most do. The teams that are playing at this time of the year do. And other teams around the league are scratching their head saying, man, we can't protect the passer. We take a lot of sacks. Well, yeah, because he's standing in the gun the whole game and the defense is just having a track meet to get to the spot. So I think both teams do a great job with protecting their quarterback and their protectors. And to your point with Detroit, I think that's going to be another factor this week.
I don't ask you about coaching every single week, but I am interested. It seems like there's two very different approaches at work here. Last week, it felt like Kyle Shanahan, I mean, he called that game fairly conservatively, maybe because he knew that he had the better overall team. You know, the sequence at the end of the first half stands out where he was kind of content to just play methodically and move into field goal range. On the other side of this, you got the most aggressive guy there is in Dan Campbell. I'm curious how you think that might play out. Do you think Kyle Shanahan will keep a similar approach, knowing that this is a better Detroit team? And obviously, you never fully know what you're going to get when Dan Campbell is willing to do the things that Detroit has done all season.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think just from covering these two guys, I think there's two different answers. I think Kyle Shanahan is going to call his game. I think he is very confident in their scheme, in their approach. Obviously, their success speaks for itself over the last handful of years. I don't think he's going to allow the threat of another coach or the presumption that another coach is going to play a particular style alter what he's going to do. I don't think the fear of Dan Campbell, he might fake a punt or a field goal, or he's going to go for 1 million fourth downs. Okay, so I have to do it too. I don't think Shanahan's going to get thrown off. Now, back to Dan Campbell. I think if I'm Dan Campbell, in my mind, I'm saying, okay, let's say San Francisco scores high 20s, 30s. It's the best offense in the league. My defense isn't great against the pass. Now, they could come out and be great, right? You always say, okay, what's worst case scenario? How many points am I going to have to get in a shootout? And then every red zone stop, every takeaway, every 3 and out, that number just gets more and more attainable, and it's easier for your offense to eclipse it, right? But that's how these guys go into the game. When you go into a game this week, you're saying, okay, Ben Johnson, Dan, we got to score 30. How are we going to score 30? We're not going to just throw the ball 1,000 times, right? We're not going to score 30 that way. We're going to run it. We're going to control it. We're going to score 30 because I'm going to go for 4th and goal from the 4. We're going to score 30 because I'm going to go for 4th and 2 from the -40. I think Dan's going to find ways to extend possessions and maximize possessions, knowing every field goal is a loss. Every punt or a kick is a loss, because I have to assume the San Francisco offense at home in good conditions is going to score. It's not that he doesn't have trust in his defense. That's how he has to build the model of the game. And then the better your defense plays, the easier it is on your offense. But you have to go in thinking worst case scenario. So I think it plays right into what you're saying about Dan Campbell. I think every opportunity he has, he understands the value of ending with 7 points every time they have the ball. And without being reckless with play calling, I think they can be a little bit more aggressive in play strategy and kind of gamesmanship.
It's ironic because it wasn't Dan that created the headlines in the last game. It was Todd Bowles with the decision to go for 2 points, down 2 possessions. It's kind of, as it always does when a coach does something very aggressive in a big spot, it's led to a week's worth of arguments and explanations. I'm curious, like, from your perspective as a broadcaster, knowing that, I mean, that feels like something that could come up, whether it's going for it on 4th down in minus territory, or if Dan Campbell does have to try to get that 2-point conversion late in a game. Do you give mind to that as you're preparing for this game? Like you and Kevin, like, hey, we might have to talk through XX scenario when a coach makes this type of decision with this many people watching.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time, and we try to learn from other games. We try to learn from other situations that pop up during the week. The one you just mentioned with Todd Bowles last week, I thought he handled it perfectly. I think that, you get that 2-point conversion. They ended up getting the stop. All of a sudden now, in theory, I know it didn't work out exactly this way for them, but in theory, it works out like how the Titans did earlier in the year, where now you get the ball down 6, and now it's not, hey, touchdown and an extra point, we send this thing to overtime, let's hope we win the coin toss. It's, I score a touchdown, I got a 98% chance of making this extra point, and we end the game right now. So the old conventional wisdom was extend the game as long as possible. Those days are over, especially if you're the road underdog, especially if the longer the game goes, typically by the end, the better team, the game starts tipping in their favor. I mean, just think of this weekend, right? Just think of the Green Bay, San Francisco game. For 3 quarters, Green Bay outplayed them. But as the game went on and it got to crunch time at the end, the better team did just enough to pull ahead. So if that game ended regulation in a tie and went into overtime, that pendulum would continue to shift towards the better team. It's just traditionally how it goes the longer it goes. So the team that's the underdog, you want to end it. So that's the whole theory behind the 14 go for 2 on the first one.
Right.
It's, I want to know how many I'm down. And I have a better chance if I got to get 1 2-point conversion to win the game, or just 1 2-point conversion to, in essence, tie the game if I fail on the first one. Going 1 for 2 is a pretty good, if you call them each 50-50 coin ticks, going 1 for 2, I got a good chance of going 1 for 2. Going 1 for 2 gets me a tie. But if I go 1 for 1, I win. Everyone's looking to win in regulation, not prolong the game. That's an old way of thinking that it's just not supported by the data.
And I think the fact that Todd Bowles figured this out, I think signals your point that, I mean, the toothpaste is out of the tube here. I mean, there just can't be that many NFL head coaches left who don't see that.
And one other thing, the other really popular situation that comes up all the time is like 4th and goal on the 2, right? And you're going in. In the old days, 4th and goal at the 1, I think everyone's like, oh, you can get 1 yard. But say it's like 4th and goal at the 3 or the 2. You're not close enough to quarterback sneak. You can't just like lunge over. You got to actually win the play to get 2-3 yards, right? In the old days, you'd kick the field goal. Hey, you always got to come away with points. It gives the defense, it gives your opponent such a momentum boost, right? Everyone's so worried about that.
Right.
But when they look at this data, the part people don't understand about analytics, they say, okay, if you failed and I gave you the ball on your own 2-yard line, I'm on defense. I actually have a higher probability of scoring a touchdown before you do, even though you have the ball. That's the formulas and what's being baked into these decisions. So everyone says, well, I have the ball. Yeah, but you got to go 98 yards. I can stop you and go 45 yards or get a turnover. Or I actually have a better opportunity of scoring before you do, which is unheard of in the NFL because you have the ball. That's why teams make these decisions, because when you bake out, yes, in that individual moment, you gave up 3 to try to get 7. But over the next handful of series, the fact that you're on the -2-yard line, my odds of scoring and making up for that, instead of getting 3 on the first possession, if I now get the ball back after a stop and get 7, I've made up for it. That's analytics.
It's true. And I just feel confident it's going to come up for y'all this weekend. I mean, I think on an even playing field with good weather, the Niners are a better team. Like, the Niners should win this game, but Dan Campbell's decision-making can change the math there in a lot of situations. Like, I'm not going to be surprised if we see a fake punt, or maybe you even just, like I said, go for it in your own territory. I can imagine if the Lions are down in the second half of this game and you can, it's 4th and 3, we can try a 50-yard field goal or just go for it. I'm totally on board with going for it in a situation like that, where, like you said, we're not trying to extend this. We got to make something happen if we're going to beat a better team in their stadium. So I'm expecting some aggressive decision-making from Dan Campbell. I can't wait. Should be a hell of a game, Greg. I hope y'all have a great call, man. As always, I appreciate the time.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
As someone who covers the entire league for a living, I do my best not to get emotionally invested in anyone, really. I mean, you can find the fun storylines. You can find the cool aspects of pretty much any result. I'd be lying if I said you don't develop a little bit of a soft spot for what the Detroit Lions are doing. It's nothing personal against the 49ers. I love watching the 49ers play. But when you think of the hard times that have faced the Detroit Lions and how long people that follow that team have been waiting for a moment like this, it's hard not to root for them a little bit. Having said all of that, as much of a underdog fun story as they might be, and as good of a team as they might be, I don't want to give the impression that they're some plucky team that doesn't belong here. They've been one of the most consistently good teams in the league all season long. Having said all of that nice stuff, I think the 49ers are in a different class from most of the NFL and certainly most of the NFC, as we've seen throughout the season. I think they have enough talent all over this roster. I think their matchups play to their strengths. I know it didn't look like it against Green Bay, but Brock Purdy actually is tremendously good under pressure. He knows how to hang in there and make throws to beat blitzes, to beat pressure, to get the ball to his playmakers. I don't think the Lions defense is equipped for that. And as I alluded to with Greg Olsen, I'm nervous about the Niners front getting push against the Detroit offensive line that is very talented, but also could be very under-equipped for this game. Greg mentioned the matchups on the edge, but I think about a guy like Javon Hargrave and what he might be able to do with the losses on the interior of the line. You add all that together, you throw in the fact that it's a home game where the Niners are especially hard to beat usually. I like San Francisco. I do think it'll be an entertaining game. I honestly won't be surprised if it plays out very similarly to the Lions win over Tampa Bay, in the sense that the writing is on the wall that the Niners are going to win this game. But I do think Detroit gives it a spirited effort all the way to the end. I'll take the Niners to win by a touchdown, give or take a point. An entertaining game, but a decisive 49ers win that gets them back to the Super Bowl for the first time since 2019. Over on the other side of the bracket, the AFC Championship game, a matchup that doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. That's what happens when two former MVPs play against each other for the right to go to the Super Bowl. It's the Kansas City Chiefs, the standard in the NFL, looking to make their 4th Super Bowl in the last 5 years, a run of dominance we just haven't seen all that often in the NFL. Even knowing the Patriots just finished their run, this is impressive in its own merits. Their 6th straight AFC Championship game, the first time they're doing it on the road. Playing host to them, the Baltimore Ravens, one of the most well-run, one of the most efficient franchises in the NFL, which is remarkable when you consider how long they've been doing this. Not long at all. They're the 2nd youngest franchise in the NFL. The league brought football back to Baltimore in 1996. And already in that time span, just 28 years, they've made the playoffs in half the years of their existence. They've won 2 Super Bowls, playing for a trip to go to their 3rd. Not bad for not even being 30 years old. But they haven't enjoyed this level of success in the Lamar Jackson era. Yes, he's won an MVP. Yes, he's working on number 2. No trips to the AFC title game since the days of Joe Flacco, and no Super Bowl appearances since 2012. Would be a crowning achievement for Lamar Jackson, also for John Harbaugh, reinventing this team, making another Super Bowl a decade after the fact. Yes, the Chiefs have the rings. They have the accolades that make them the standard in the NFL today. The Ravens quietly right there in the mix among most successful franchises in the NFL. And the winner of this game will have plenty of momentum, plenty to be excited about heading in to Super Bowl 58. To preview it all, as I mentioned, my guy Greg Auman joins the show. We're going to talk Ravens Chiefs. We're also going to talk some coaching news down in the NFC South. All right, Greg, you're headed up to Baltimore Saturday night. Ravens, Chiefs. The soon-to-be MVP, I feel very comfortable continuing to say that, Lamar Jackson. The reigning MVP, Patrick Mahomes. Big game in Baltimore. I love the fact, I've said this already this week too, first AFC Championship game in Baltimore since 1971. I'm pumped for the fans there. They get to have the game back in Baltimore. I'm curious from your perspective covering this game. Kansas City, obviously, their offense got back on the right track for the first time in really what feels like all season against Buffalo last week. They got Travis Kelce involved. They scored 27 points. At the risk of sounding like a hater, are we sure the Chiefs are back? Or do we think maybe it was a byproduct of Buffalo being so banged up on defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think they had probably the more difficult win to get in compared to the Texans. I think the Texans were certainly capable of beating the Ravens, but Baltimore had a fairly convincing win, and Buffalo, got in, but it wasn't easy by any means. Not Buffalo, Kansas City got in. Injuries on defense are something that I think limited Buffalo the whole year. I still thought it was a game they could win, and an impressive win for Kansas City to pull it out. Are they back? I'm not ready to say that yet. But I mean, this is a game where you think about the two offenses going head to head. They need to have their A game. They need to have, it's probably going to be a 31, 34 point minimum to win this game on Sunday.
Like I said, it was a game. And look, you do it, you get credit for it, regardless of the circumstances. But Travis Kelce, his best game in a while, 5 for 75 and 2 touchdowns. I do think the Ravens are incredibly equipped to deal with him between all of their different safeties. They got about 5 of them that can do the job really well. They've obviously got arguably the best linebacker duo in the NFL, Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. Do you think that's where this starts? Is that going to be the focal point for this Ravens defense, is taking that safety blanket away and putting it back on these young Chiefs receivers?
Totally. I think so. I mean, it's one of those where they won games where Kelce was barely contributing, so they can. But yeah, if you think about the big difference, I mean, these teams, last time these teams faced was 21. And the big difference is there is no Tyreek Hill. I mean, there is the drop off in who they have to go to and lean on in the postseason, besides Kelce, is a major drop off. And now it's funny. Now you look at Baltimore, and Baltimore has these veteran receivers and Zay Flowers. And if anything, things have kind of shifted from Lamar not having the weapons to now you wondering whether Patrick Mahomes has enough ammunition downfield. I think he's gotten by with it. But in a game like this, especially on the road, it's a big ask.
Which also leads to the question of it hasn't always been good, but the running game has come in clutch for the Chiefs at times this season. Isaiah Pacheco, obviously, he's going to get over 1,000 yards for the season in this game, if I had to guess. Is that the answer? And I mean, if anybody can put the team on their back, it's Patrick Mahomes. And this is going to be a tall order against this Baltimore defense. But do you have any sense of optimism that Kansas City can find that dimension in the running game to take a little pressure off of him?
Well, they can. It's a tough defense to run against for sure. I mean, you look at the 4 games, it's like Ravens and Chiefs played 4 times from 18 to 21. And Patrick Mahomes in those 4 games is 12 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, averaging 370 yards a game through the air. And again, that's with Tyreek Hill back then. But they know him well. That you think about changes that Baltimore has made on defense with Martindale out, with McDonald in. I mean, there's things they've done to specifically try and upgrade their defense from a personnel standpoint, from a coaching standpoint. These are the games that you do that for. This is where you reinforce yourself as the best defense in the NFL by taking care of an offense like this and moving on in the playoffs.
On the flip side of this, I mean, Baltimore had to be highly intrigued watching Josh Allen and the Bills run the ball the way they did in Buffalo the other day. I know the Chiefs got the win, but a very impressive day on the ground from Buffalo. That seems like it would play pretty well to Baltimore's strengths to me. How do you see that? Because this Chiefs run defense can be a liability. You add Lamar Jackson into the mix and what they do running the ball, that seems like it could spell trouble in this matchup.
Absolutely. This is the number 1 run offense in the NFL, 156 yards a game on the ground. You look in the last 5 years, the Chiefs defense, the top 2 games given up by quarterbacks rushing against them are both Lamar Jackson. It's 107 yards and 80 yards. I think there's one other game, maybe an Easton Stick week 18 kind of mean nothing game is the only other one over 60 yards. So nobody has run against this Chiefs defense better than Lamar Jackson. I think they've changed their offense this year to run him less, to throw more. I was writing something today on big play passing. I mean, you go back 1 year ago, Chiefs are number 1 in the NFL in pass plays of 20 yards or more. Ravens are second to last in the NFL. One had 40 more than the other. And this year they have the same amount of pass plays, 20 yards or more. The Chiefs have dropped down. The Ravens have moved up, and now they're on equal footing there, which says a lot about them adding to the deep pass game that Baltimore maybe hasn't had in past years.
It's the funny thing to me about this is, yeah, I mean, and Lamar Jackson hasn't been, obviously he's going to run the ball and he's very good at it, but over the course of the season, that it hasn't been his MO the way that you expect, knowing his athleticism. Then he goes for 100 against Houston last week. And I wonder how much Todd Monken, Baltimore offensive coordinator, changes his approach here, because I do think Kansas City's better equipped to deal with the explosive passing game. L'Jarius Sneed, one of the more underrated corners in the NFL. Trent McDuffie, the young nickelback. They have Justin Reed. They've got safeties and DBs that can at least hope to limit that. Whereas, maybe this is a day where Baltimore gets back to the old school, where Lamar Jackson is carrying the ball a little bit more. They are leaning on that a little more often than we're used to.
Yeah, it would go against kind of the curve of what this year has been. I mean, Lamar Jackson's rushing yards per game, lowest since his rookie year, I think. Passing yards, he set career highs for passing yards, for yards per attempt, for completion percentage. He's definitely taken a step up as a passer. You think about the people they added, not only Zay Flowers with a number 1 draft pick, but free agents like Odell Beckham, like Nelson Aguilar, Bateman's still in there. They've done this year without Mark Andrews for 7 games. I think Likely stepped up and played really well in his absence. The idea of having both of them as a really strong 1-2 punch. I think they're the only team in the NFL that had two tight ends that caught 5 touchdowns or more. So now there's a depth to this passing game as well. But yeah, you're right. If it's worked in the past against this defense, I'm not saying 15 design runs, but I think they would do well early in the game to remind Kansas City how dangerous he is in the open field.
I'm glad you brought up Mark Andrews as well. At the time of this recording, we'll see what happens, but it does look like he's got a shot to play his first game since that Thursday night injury halfway through the season. You already touched on it, but having Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews available for this game, again, this seems like a situation that could play into Baltimore's favor, where you don't have to potentially test the strength of this Kansas City defense the way that you might. And maybe we see Baltimore get a lot of its production over the middle of the field.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can run out of 12 personnel. If you have the two of them, I think your red zone offense is almost ideal to have those two, again, with Flowers and Odell lining up as your two receivers. They should be able to do well in the red zone with that as at their disposal. It's not going to be Mark Andrews at full strength. It's going to be Mark Andrews who hasn't played in 2 months and is coming off of a fracture and an ankle sprain and all those kind of things. So I think you have to be careful how you use him. But if you use him in the red zone, if you find 20 plays for him in this first game back, he can be a difference maker. If it's just a single red zone touchdown catch, or the attention that the defense gives him that opens up a receiver to be one-on-one in the end zone, that's the edge you need in the playoffs right now.
I feel bad, like going through the topics that I prepared to cover for this game. It sounds, as I'm talking to you, like I'm not giving the Chiefs a chance. Like, I mean, on paper, Baltimore does look to have the edge in just about every facet of this. It's worth mentioning, too, Kansas City guard Joe Thuney dealing with a pec injury. He might not be able to play. That's another problem for the Chiefs to deal with. Justin Madubuike having a wonderful season at defensive tackle for Baltimore. But the Chiefs did just go on the road and do this against a comparably good team, a white-hot Bills team. So if they're going to do this, and I do think they can, what do you think it looks like? What do you think they need to do to get past Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like what Tom Brady had. It seemed like for so many years, Brady's path to the Super Bowl was home games and nothing but Foxborough. And the exception might be, I guess, maybe the COVID year. He had 3 road games, but those aren't even really full stadiums. So much of what Patrick Mahomes has done to get to the Super Bowl, to put them in position to win championships, is winning on their home field. And like you said, going into Buffalo in those conditions in the divisional round is certainly one thing. You don't think about Baltimore as being as hostile a place, maybe, but it's definitely something they have to overcome. It's going to need to be a game on both sides of the ball. I think we've forgotten a little bit about Spags and what he can do, but he has to have a game where he steps up. This is a game where, Lamar is, again, we talk about him not being the MVP yet. He's probably the MVP of this league. And it's something where he's solidified that with his play in the second half of the season. So just to contain him, just to hold him to 3 total touchdowns or 80 on the ground and 200 in the air is an accomplishment. And I mean, luckily they have a Patrick Mahomes offense. So you're equipped to go score for score with just about anybody you go up against. But I do think the personnel around the quarterbacks probably, with the exception of Kelsey, is an advantage for Baltimore. And that's something they need to, overcome, but it's something they certainly can. I'm intrigued in that the assistants here, okay, you have Baltimore with McDonald and Monken, both coveted as head coaches, potentially getting what few jobs are left in the NFL right now. And you don't have that with Spags, and you don't have that on the Kansas City side of things. So I'm intrigued in that it's kind of like everybody else is lost under Andy Reid and doesn't have the same cachet as hot assistants go right now. But it's a chance for those guys, especially Spags, to show he's still got it.
How up? I've been thinking about it recently. How good must it feel in Kansas City to know? I mean, Steve Spagnuolo is an amazing coach, but it seems like he's happy where he is. He's done the head coaching thing. He's done everything you can do, and it seems like he's just perfectly happy coaching this Kansas City defense. And that's got to be such a load off of Andy Reid's mind and Brett Veach, the general manager's mind, to just know, like, Spags is going to be here to coach this up. Because, yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any noise about him not being there in the future. I just think that's got to be such just a peace of mind in Kansas City.
Right, absolutely. And it's one of those where, I mean, I've always felt like a head coach, it's so crucial to have a strong weak side coordinator, whatever side of the ball your background is in. The opposite side, you want to be able to have like a 1A, like a head coach on defense that you trust to handle that side of the ball. And Andy Reid doesn't have to cross the party line and mess with the defense very much at all because of that. I remember doing late in the year, like November, doing like a top 10 assistants and who the hot assistants are going to be. And I didn't have Spags on that list. And it was first year in the year, like, wow, this defense, you'd think just as they borrow from the offense of this and you see interest in his assistants that way, you don't see that on the defensive side. I think it's because Spags has been a head coach before. It didn't go well. He's older where there's not an upside to hiring him. But like you said, if you can find somebody who's a great coordinator and content in that, for years at a time. You just get to run him parallel to what Andy Reid's done on offense, and so many good assistants on that side of the ball.
He held Josh Allen without a 20-yard gain in Buffalo last week. So, yeah, to your point, he's going to have something dialed up for Lamar. Maybe a slightly better performance against the run would be my suggestion here if they're going to pull this off. I can't wait. Looking forward to it. We will definitely catch up with you after the game. Before we let you go, though, it's very fortuitous. Not only are you covering Chiefs Ravens for us, you are also our NFC South writer. And literally, as we're logging on to do this interview, the Carolina Panthers hire away Tampa Bay offensive coordinator Dave Canales to be their new head coach. So a nice little NFC South 2-for-1 in your neck of the woods. Let's start with Carolina's aspect of this. It makes a ton of sense when you look at Canales' track record, why a team with a young quarterback might hire him. But walk me through that and the thought process of what Carolina wants from Dave Canales.
Yeah, if you think about the priority in this hire being somebody that can develop and cultivate Bryce Young in a way that Frank Reich was not able to do this first year, it makes sense that they'd like Dave Canales, and that his last 2 years are both very successful reclamation projects. You start with him being the quarterback's coach for Geno Smith, kind of leading the Seahawks into the playoffs in the post-Russell Wilson era, Pro Bowl level play there, got him a big contract. And then he comes to Tampa. He's a first-time coordinator, a first-time play caller. And you see it again. You see Baker Mayfield have arguably the best year of his career highs in yards and passing touchdowns, wins a division title here, wins a playoff game. And even though he only has 1 year as a coordinator, as a play caller, he's a head coach now. And I think a big part of that is him taking quarterbacks and making them much better in a short amount of time.
It's got to be. I mean, I think you have to be excited if you're a Panthers fan because of the track record that you just mentioned, and it's all going to hinge on getting something out of Bryce Young. Obviously, I'm fascinated to see how Canales does with the resources available there. Obviously, no first-round pick for Carolina, so I don't know if the success is going to come right away like it has these last 2 years for Dave Canales, but I'm interested to see that. On the Tampa Bay side of this, it seems like it kind of upsets the apple cart for the Buccaneers. Like, it was easy to imagine a world where you run it back, you re-sign Baker Mayfield, you get Mike Evans back. Do you think losing Canales has a chance to change that plan? And what might Todd Bowles do to replace to fill his offensive coordinator vacancy?
Yeah, it definitely has the potential to be a domino kind of thing where, as much as I think Baker Mayfield wants to be back in Tampa, I think part of why things worked for him was finding a coordinator, finding a scheme that really played to his strengths, protected his weaknesses. And he won't know that he'll have that with whoever they bring in here. I do think the Bucs will probably go outside. There's actually a ton of offensive coordinators that are available, whether by their own firing or their head coach being fired. Thomas Brown in Carolina is a guy who they interviewed twice last year. He ended up picking Carolina. So he could be like the coordinator to be named in this whole Canales deal. There's guys like Alex Van Pelt, who was a coordinator in Cleveland, was there for Baker in his best years in 20 and 21 in Cleveland with the Browns as part of a playoff team. Again, there's guys like the Eagles and Brian Johnson, the Chargers, and Kellen Moore. There's coaches that you probably didn't expect to be available this late in the process as offensive coordinators that Bowles does not have ties with, that Baker Mayfield doesn't necessarily have ties with, but they're probably stronger resumes than what Dave Canales had here coming a year ago. I think it's an easier job to fill. A year ago, they had no cap space. It's just post Brady. You don't know who the quarterback is. Here, I think they can at least see, if you do this and we can get Baker back, you'll have this. I think those kind of things might help Mike Evans come back. But if they don't get it right, they could lose Baker, they could lose Mike Evans, and then your offensive identity is kind of restarting from scratch almost.
I wonder if Panthers owner David Tepper thought about this of like, yeah, I like Dave Canales, but also we could really cause some chaos for our division rivals down there. Just nice little bonus to go along with the hire. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens there. Greg, thank you for your expertise on a variety of different levels. Enjoy the scene in Baltimore, my man, and we'll catch up with you after the game.
Thanks, Dave. We'll do it again soon. Thank you.
Now comes my least favorite part of the show, and that's the part where I pick against the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm dreading it because this is what they do. They lure you into a false sense of security, and then they remind you that they have the best player on planet Earth. His name's Patrick Mahomes. He's a Kansas City Chief. They're never out of a game if he's there. They're 4-1 in their last 5 games as an underdog, including last week when they went to Buffalo and beat the Bills. It would be so unsurprising if I'm here on Monday apologizing to the Chiefs for doubting them. But at the same time, you go off of what you've seen this season, and that is, even with Superman, Patrick Mahomes, under center, they have struggled at times. I know they refound their mojo against Buffalo, but the season-long resume of work says that it's a recurring issue, and against the best defense in the NFL, I expect it to be a slog. The Ravens are equipped to deal with everything the Chiefs throw at them, whether it's limiting the explosive passing plays, which they've been able to do all season long, whether it's having the personnel to keep Patrick Mahomes from extending plays, from picking up yards with his feet, having 2 great linebackers that can rush the passer, as well as 5 capable safeties, can do a hell of a lot to limit those types of plays. I think they can bracket Travis Kelce, make his life much harder than it was in Buffalo. And with all of that going, sure, the Chiefs are going to have success because they do have Patrick Mahomes, but I think the Ravens can limit them to a low enough point total that Lamar Jackson and company can top it. We talked with Greg about the Ravens' abilities on the ground in this game. I would expect it's going to be another banner day in the rushing attack, and there will be just enough plays in the passing game. I will take the Ravens. I think it's going to be a thrilling game, just like Chiefs-Bills a week ago in terms of the drama, in terms of the high-level quarterback play. But the Ravens are at home. The Ravens have been the most complete team in the NFL all season long, and I will take them to get to the Super Bowl in a 24-20 type of win, a thriller. Lamar Jackson gets to his first Super Bowl. If I'm wrong, again, I would be the least surprised person on planet Earth. That is the power of Patrick Mahomes. But I will roll with the Ravens, which means I am officially picking a rematch in the Super Bowl, Baltimore-San Francisco, not just a rematch of Super Bowl 47, where the Ravens beat the 49ers in New Orleans a decade ago. Also a rematch from this year. These teams met on Christmas night just a month and a half ago. The Ravens got the better of the Niners 33-19 in Santa Clara. It was a lot more lopsided than the final score made it look. We will see if I'm right. Can the Niners get them back in the Super Bowl? That's what I'm predicting. 1 seed versus 1 seed. They've been the 2 best teams in the league all season long. I think it would be entirely fitting if that is the final game of the season. Of course, my playoff picks admittedly haven't been wonderful this year. We'll see if I fare any better. Please enjoy the conference championship games. As always, we will be back on Monday to break it all down. Whether I'm right or wrong, we'll take you through it. We'll have all hands on deck for both games in Santa Clara. Not only are we going to catch up with Greg Olsen and Kevin Burkhardt from Niners Lions, but our friend Carmen Vitale is also there to cover the NFC Championship game. We'll catch up with both of them over on the other side. Like we said, Greg Auman will be in Baltimore for Ravens Chiefs. Plenty of content coming your way Monday as we prepare for Super Bowl 58. We will finally know who's playing. We'll see you then. Please, as always, go find us on Spotify. Check in on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, your NFL news. We got so much good content coming for you in the week off before the Super Bowl, as well as Super Bowl week, obviously. Cannot wait for that. Cannot wait for the game Sunday. Hope y'all enjoy. I'll catch up with you Monday.